In the year 1219, as Genghis Khan's armies swept across the known world like a plague of locusts, a woman named Altan stood on the walls of a burning city and watched her entire world turn to ash. She was not a warrior. She was not a noble. She was a healer, one of the last shamans of the Tatar people, a tribe that had been hunted and destroyed by the Mongols for generations. The Tatars had once tried to genocide the Mongols. Now the Mongols were returning the favor. But Altan did not run. Instead, she stood and waited for death to find her. What she found instead was something far more dangerous than death. She found a man who would change everything she believed about love, loyalty, and the possibility of redemption in a world built on conquest and blood. This is the story of Subutai and Altan, a love born in the ashes of war, forged in suffering and powerful enough to challenge even the Khan himself. The city of Riazan fell on a winter morning that seemed to arrive all at once. One moment, the Russian defenders were holding their positions on the stone walls. The next moment, the Mongol archers released their arrows, so many arrows that they blocked out the sun itself. The world went dark, and when the arrows fell like rain upon the defenders, it seemed as if heaven itself had turned against the city. Altan watched from the rooftop of the temple where she had been treating the wounded. She was 32 years old, though her face showed the weathering of a life lived in hardship. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was bound back in the style of the Tatar shamans. Her hands, which had spent decades learning the secrets of healing plants and prayers, were now useless. Around her, the city screamed. The Mongol cavalry poured through the broken gates like a river of leather and steel. Horses trampled the streets. Spears thrust through windows. The sound of destruction was so total, so complete, that it seemed to consume all other sound. Even the screams of the dying seemed small against it. Altan's apprentice, a young girl named Nadia, grabbed her arm. "We have to run," she pleaded. "Shaman, please, we have to run." But Altan did not run. She had seen too much in her life to run anymore. The Mongols had destroyed her tribe once. They had killed her family. They had scattered her people across the steppes like seeds in the wind. She had spent 30 years building a new life, learning how to heal the sick, how to serve others, how to find purpose in a world that seemed determined to destroy everything she loved. She would not run from this. If it was her time to die, then she would die with dignity. "Go," she told Nadia. "There are caves in the hills. Hide there. Survive." "I won't leave you," Nadia said. Clapperboard Video 2. The Healer from the Steppes. Full production package, 12-minute script. White heavy checkmark character Simlary, Ben Sektim. White heavy checkmark Kamutin. Subutai Sengiz Hananen Unlu Generali. White heavy checkmark Kaden. Altan, Tatar Kabilsandan, Saman Safasi Gukavar. White heavy checkmark Azura Linmasai. Sava Siracindarus Saranin Surlari Yikalurkin. White heavy checkmark Askbaslanjasai. Yaralari Tedavi Ederken. Tibi Biljasai Onu Kurdarir. White heavy checkmark Katisma. Sengiz Hanan Kuriai Dejal, S. Almasini Yasaklamasi. Open book full script Ingelis 3. Sahis Anlatim. Midnight to 1:30 hook and opening. In the year 1219, as Genghis Khan's armies swept across the known world like a plague of locusts, a woman named Altan stood on the walls of a burning city and watched her entire world turn to ash. She was not a warrior. She was not a noble. She was a healer, one of the last shamans of the Tatar people, a tribe that had been hunted and destroyed by the Mongols for generations. The Tatars had once tried to genocide the Mongols. Now the Mongols were returning the favor. But Altan did not run. Instead, she stood and waited for death to find her. What she found instead was something far more dangerous than death. She found a man who would change everything she believed about love, loyalty, and the possibility of redemption in a world built on conquest and blood. This is the story of Subutai and Altan, a love born in the ashes of war, forged in suffering and powerful enough to challenge even the Khan himself. #### 1:30 to 4 o'clock Act 1. The city burning. The city of Riazan fell on a winter morning that seemed to arrive all at once. One moment, the Russian defenders were holding their positions on the stone walls. The The next moment the Mongol archers released their arrows, so many arrows that they blocked out the sun itself. The world went dark, and when the arrows fell like rain upon the defenders, it seemed as if heaven itself had turned against the city. Altan watched from the rooftop of the temple where she had been treating the wounded. She was 32 years old, though her face showed the weathering of a life lived in hardship. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was bound back in the style of the Tatar shamans. Her hands, which had spent decades learning the secrets of healing plants and prayers, were now useless. Around her the city screamed. The Mongol cavalry poured through the broken gates like a river of leather and steel. Horses trampled the streets. Spears thrust through windows. The sound of destruction was so total, so complete, that it seemed to consume all other sound. Even the screams of the dying seemed small against it. Altan's apprentice, a young girl named Nadia, grabbed her arm. "We have to run," she pleaded. "Shaman, please, we have to run." But Altan did not run. She had seen too much in her life to run anymore. The Mongols had destroyed her tribe once. They had killed her family. They had scattered her people across the steppes like seeds in the wind. She had spent 30 years building a new life, learning how to heal the sick, how to serve others, how to find purpose in a world that seemed determined to destroy everything she loved. She would not run from this. If it was her time to die, then she would die with dignity. "Go," she told Nadia. "There are caves in the hills. Hide there. Survive." "I won't leave you," Nadia said. "Yes, you will," Altan replied firmly. "Because I am ordering you to. Because your life matters. And because if one of us escapes this, I need it to be you." She pushed the girl toward the back stairs, and Nadia, crying, disappeared into the smoke. Altan turned back to the window and watched as the Mongol cavalry systematically destroyed everything. They were not random in their violence. There was a terrible efficiency to it. They were methodical, professional. This was not rage, this was work. She could see the commander now, a man on a dark horse moving through the chaos with absolute control, while other Mongol warriors screamed battle cries and charged forward. In the ecstasy of violence, this man moved with cold precision. He gestured, and entire sections of the cavalry wheeled into new formations. He pointed, and warriors rushed to new positions. This was not a soldier. This was a general. This was the kind of mind that could orchestrate the destruction of empires. Altan did not know it yet, but she was watching Subutai, a man who would become known as the flawless throughout history, a man whose military genius would reshape the world, a man whose name would be spoken in fear and reverence for centuries after his death. The temple door burst open below her. Mongol warriors poured into the sacred space, toppling icons, slashing at tapestries, destroying everything that represented the spiritual connection between the Tatar people and the divine. Altan did not resist. She simply stood at the top of the temple stairs and waited. The warriors saw her. They froze for a moment, perhaps struck by something in her expression. She was not afraid. She was not pleading. She simply stood, waiting for what came next. One of the warriors raised his spear. Then a voice cut through the chaos. A voice so sharp, so commanding that even the Mongol soldiers obeyed instantly. "Stop!" The general on the dark horse had dismounted. He walked through the temple with the same cold precision he had shown on the battlefield. His eyes were dark, intelligent, completely devoid of emotion. When he looked at Altan, she felt like a piece of territory being assessed for strategic value. "Take her alive," he commanded, "and bring the wounded to the courtyard." Carefully. The soldiers were confused. In the chaos of conquest, the order was usually simple. Kill everyone, take the valuables, burn the city. But Subutai had other ideas. As the Mongol warriors dragged Altan down the stairs, she realized that her survival might turn out to be a far more complex fate than simple death. For 3 days, Altan was held in a tent with dozens of other captives. They were kept in a pen like animals, given only water and hard bread. Around them, the Mongol army continued its work of destruction and organization. On the 4th day, a Mongol officer appeared at the tent entrance. He pointed directly at Altan. "You." the older woman. Come. Altan was pulled to her feet and led through the Mongol encampment. She saw things that made her understand the true scope of Genghis Khan's ambitions. There were thousands upon thousands of soldiers. There were supply lines stretching for miles. There were siege engines and cavalry formations and systems of organization that seemed impossible. But what struck her most was the silence. Despite the size of the army, despite the thousands of warriors, the encampment was ordered and quiet. There was no chaos here. There was only discipline. She was brought to a large gur, the white felt tent of a commander. When she was pushed inside, she gasped. On a bed of furs lay a man covered in blood. It was Subutai, and he was dying. A Mongol physician stood over him, looking helpless. There was a sword wound across his ribs, deep, infected, the kind of wound that killed slowly through fever and poison. He will not let us amputate the arm, the physician said when he saw Altan. He gestured to an infection that had spread from a separate wound. He says a general with one arm is worthless. He has ordered us to let him die. Altan approached the bed slowly. Subutai's eyes were closed, his body consumed by fever. She could see the poison in his blood, the way the infection was spreading like ink through water. Without asking permission, she began to examine his wounds. She ran her fingers around the infected areas. She smelled the deep infection. She pressed carefully around the swelling, feeling for how far the poison had spread. 3 days, she said quietly. 3 days he has had these wounds? Yes, the physician replied. Then he will be dead in 2 more days if nothing is done, Altan said. The infection has reached deep into his body. I know, the physician said. This is why I have tried to convince him to let me amputate. But he refuses. Altan looked around the gur and saw something that made her hope ignite. There were jars of supplies, Mongol supplies, gathered from across the conquered territories. She began to move through them, selecting items, sniffing them, tasting small amounts on her tongue to understand their properties. I need someone to gather me specific plants, she said. Willow bark, garlic, the inner flesh of certain roots. I need honey raw, not processed. And I need fire, clean water, and cloth. The physician stared at her. You are a shaman? I am a healer, Altan replied. Whether that makes me a shaman depends on whether your god is the same as mine. For the next 18 hours, Altan did not sleep. She cleaned Subutai's wounds with boiling water infused with herbs. She made poultices from plants she had gathered and taught the Mongol soldiers to apply them. She crushed willow bark into a powder and forced it down his throat in a bitter tea. She sang the old Tatar songs of healing and restoration that her grandmother had taught her. As she worked, the fever broke on the second morning. Subutai's eyes opened, and he looked at Altan with the kind of confusion that comes from waking from a near-death experience. For a moment he seemed not to understand where he was or how much time had passed. You are alive, Altan said simply. Why? He asked, his voice hoarse. Because I prevented the infection from reaching your heart, she replied. In 3 days you will be strong enough to move. In a week you will be able to ride. In a month you will be whole again. Subutai tried to move his arm and winced. The wound was still painful, but the deep infection was gone. He could feel it. He could feel his body responding to something it hadn't felt in days, the possibility of healing. What is your name? He asked. Altan, she replied. Where are you from? From a people the Mongols destroyed, she said, meeting his eyes. From a tribe that tried to genocide yours long ago. I am Tatar. Subutai stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Then you have more reason to want me dead than anyone in this army, he said. And yet you saved my life. Why? Because a man is not his people, Altan replied. And a life once taken cannot be returned. I have seen enough death. I chose to give life instead. Over the next week, as Subutai healed, Altan remained in his tent. She continued to treat his wounds. She continued to sing her healing songs. She continued to prepare medicines and poultices. And slowly something shifted between them. Subutai began to ask her questions. Not commands but genuine questions. He asked about her life before the conquest, about her tribe, about what it meant to be a healer, about why she had not tried to escape. Where would I go? Altan replied to that last question. The Mongols are everywhere. And besides, I made a choice to stay. To help you. I will not run from that choice. You could hate me, Subutai said. You could wish me dead. The Mongols destroyed your people. The Mongols are not you, Altan replied. You are one man. And that man spared my city. I saw you when the soldiers wanted to kill everyone. You said to take me alive. To bring the wounded to the courtyard carefully. You were merciful when you could have been cruel. I was strategic, Subutai corrected. I do not believe in unnecessary cruelty. Wastes resources and creates enemies. That is not mercy. That is pragmatism. Perhaps, Altan said. But the result is the same. Mercy, whether from the heart or from strategy, is still mercy. One evening, as the sun set over the steppe and painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Subutai took Altan's hand. His grip was strong now. He was healing quickly, faster than anyone had expected. When I am healed, he said, I will return to the Khan. There will be more battles, more cities to conquer, more blood. This is my life. This is what I am made for. I know, Altan replied. But I do not want to lose you, he continued. Would you stay with me? Not as a captive, not as a servant, but as a companion, as someone who chooses to be by my side. Altan looked at this man, a warrior who had orchestrated the destruction of countless cities, who had killed thousands in service to the Khan's ambitions. And she saw something that most people never saw, the loneliness beneath the power, the isolation of a man who was so good at warfare that he had never learned how to be anything else. Yes, she said. I will stay with you. And in that moment, as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars began to emerge, something changed. A general and a healer had found each other in the midst of destruction. And against all odds, against all history, they had found something that neither of them had dared to hope for. They had found love. 3 months passed. Subutai healed completely. The wounds that should have been permanent became merely scars, reminders of a time when death had come close and chosen to pass him by. He returned to the Khan's service, and he took Altan with him. They traveled across the steppes together. They camped under stars so numerous they seemed to reflect an infinite sky. They sat by fires and talked, Subutai telling her about the cities he had conquered, the strategies he had developed, the vision he held of a world united under Mongol rule. Altan telling him about the old ways, the shamanic traditions of her people, the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. And in the quiet moments when they were alone, Subutai allowed himself to be vulnerable in ways that his position could never permit. He would lay his head in her lap and allow her to run her fingers through his hair. He would hold her close and admit the one thing he had never admitted to anyone, that beneath the general, beneath the soldier, he was tired, bone-tired, tired of war, of conquest, of the endless need to prove his worth through violence. If you could choose any life, Altan asked him one night, what would it be? This, he said simply. This with you. A simple life. A wife who heals instead of kills. Children. A home on the steppes. But I cannot have it. The Khan has need of me. The Empire needs generals like me. I am bound to this life of war until the day I die. Then we will make peace with that, Altan said. We will find love in the spaces between battles. We will build a life that exists in the margins of this empire. But their secret could not stay hidden forever. Genghis Khan had begun to notice that Subutai was different. He was still the most brilliant general in the Mongol army. His strategies were still flawless, his decisions still sound. But there was something else now, a hesitation, a moment where he seemed to consider whether a battle was necessary before engaging. The Khan called for Subutai one cold morning in early winter. When Subutai arrived at the Khan's gur, Altan was brought with him. She was wearing Mongol clothes now. She had adapted to this life, but her eyes still held the spark of the Tatar shaman. So, Genghis Khan said, looking at them both, my greatest general has taken a wife. A Tatar wife. A woman from a people we destroyed. She is my chosen partner, Subutai replied calmly. She saved my life. She serves the empire by keeping me healthy and strong. That is not what I am told, the Khan said. I am told that you love her. That she has made you soft. That you are losing the edge that made you great. That is not true, Subutai replied. I am more effective now than I have ever been. You are distracted, the Khan said flatly. An empire cannot be built by distracted generals. The empire requires total commitment, total devotion. Everything else must be sacrifice. Even happiness? Altan asked, speaking directly to the Khan for the first time. The Khan's eyes fixed on her like a predator locking onto prey. You speak when you have not been spoken to. I do, Altan replied, her voice steady despite her fear. Because what you are saying is that love is a weakness, that a man cannot love a woman and still be strong. But in my tradition we believe the opposite. We believe that love is the greatest strength, that it connects us to the divine, that it makes us willing to protect and build, instead of simply destroy. There was a long silence. The Khan rose from his seat and walked toward them both. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and dangerous. In the Mongol tradition, he said, a woman who is not born Mongol is property. She is a spoil of war. She has no rights. She has no voice. She exists to serve her man and bear his children. She does not speak to the Khan. She does not question the empire. Then I will leave, Altan said. I will not stay where I have no voice. I will not. Live as property. You will do as you are told, the Khan replied coldly. But Subutai stepped forward. With respect, Khan, he said, and his voice carried a note that no one had heard before, defiance. I will not have her treated as property. She is my wife. Not in the way of captives and war spoils, but in truth. She chose to stay with me. She deserves the respect that comes with that choice. The Khan stared at Subutai for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, something almost like recognition. You would defy me for this woman? He asked. I would, Subutai replied. Even knowing that defiance can cost you everything? Your position, your rank, your life. Yes, Subutai said. Because some things are worth more than power. The Khan returned to his seat. He was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, the fate of Subutai and Altan hung in balance. Finally he spoke. You are the finest general I have ever known, Subutai. Your strategies have won me empires. Your mind is sharper than any sword. But you are also the first of my generals to ever put love before duty. He paused. Normally, this would be grounds for execution. A general divided in loyalty is a liability. But the Khan smiled slightly. I am not a simple man. I understand the complexity of what you have said. Your woman saved your life. She healed you when my own physician said you would die. Perhaps that is the will of heaven. The Khan gestured to a scribe. Record this. Subutai and the woman Altan are to be recognized as husband and wife in the Mongol tradition. She will be given the rank and privileges of a general's consort. And no man in this empire will question their union. Again, if anyone speaks against it, they will answer to me. He looked directly at Altan. You will not speak to me again unless I grant you permission. But you will be treated with the respect due to the wife of my greatest general. This is my decree. Subutai took Altan's hand, and they bowed before the Khan. When they left the gur, Altan was shaking. Whether from relief or fear, she could not tell. We are going to have a life, Subutai whispered to her. The Khan has granted it. We are going to have a life together. That night, as they lay together in their gur under the infinite stars of the Mongol sky, Altan understood something profound. That love could exist even in the heart of an empire built on conquest. That compassion could exist alongside ruthlessness. That a warrior could be strong precisely because he loved someone more than he loved power. And Subutai, for the first time in his life, understood what it meant to have something to live for beyond conquest. He understood that the greatest victory was not the fall of a city, but the moment when a woman looked at him and saw not a general, but a man. 5 years passed. Subutai and Altan had 2 children, a son named Batu and a daughter named Saran. They grew up on the steppes, learning both the ways of war and the ways of healing. Their father taught them strategy and discipline. Their mother taught them compassion and connection to the spiritual world. The Mongol Empire continued to expand. Subutai continued to be its greatest general, orchestrating victories that seemed impossible. But he was changed. He was no longer the ruthless machine he had been before. He was a man who calculated casualties more carefully, a man who offered surrender terms that allowed cities to retain their cultural traditions, a man who believed that an empire built on conquest alone would eventually crumble, but an empire built on the integration of cultures might last forever. His philosophy would eventually influence the Mongol Empire's approach to governance, an approach that allowed diverse peoples to maintain their traditions while serving the Khan. And historians would later note that this was a significant factor in the longevity of the Mongol Empire's control over such vast territories. But none of them would know the true source of this shift in thinking. None of them would know that it came from a man sitting by a fire with his Tatar wife listening to her speak about the interconnectedness of all things, the importance of respecting the traditions of conquered peoples, the understanding that strength comes not from destruction alone but from the ability to create something lasting. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, Subutai attended his funeral, and when Altan saw him return to their gur, she knew without him speaking that something fundamental had shifted. The Khan is gone, Subutai said simply. The man who unified the Mongol tribes. The man who created an empire that stretches from ocean to ocean. And you? Altan asked. I am old now, Subutai replied. 70 years old. I have spent my entire life at war. I have never known peace. I have never built anything that did not destroy something else. He took her hands. But I have known love. With you I have known something that the Khan never allowed himself to know. Something that might be more powerful than an empire. I want to spend my remaining years cultivating that, not destroying it. They retired from active military service and established themselves in a valley where the mountains met the steppes. They built a home. They planted gardens. They welcomed wounded soldiers and trained a new generation of healers. They lived a quiet life. Life that seemed impossible for a man like Subutai, but which turned out to be exactly what he had always needed. When historians later wrote about Subutai, they would call him the flawless, a general whose strategies had no equal, a military mind that had shaped empires. But they would not know about the woman who had healed him, about the Tatar shaman who had saved his life and in doing so had saved his soul. Yet in small ways that influence would echo through history. The Mongol Empire's approach to cultural integration, the respect for conquered people's traditions, the understanding that strength and compassion were not opposites but could exist together. All of it traced back to a moment when a dying general was healed by a woman from a people he had helped destroy, and discovered that love could exist in the spaces between empires. On a clear night, as they sat together watching the stars, Altan asked Subutai, "Do you regret your life? All those wars, all that conquest?" "No," he said thoughtfully, "because every war led me to you. Every conquest brought me closer to understanding what truly matters. Every battle was necessary because it was part of the path that brought us together." He turned to look at her, and she saw in his scarred face the reflection of all they had built together. "I would do it all again," he said, "if the ending was the same. If I ended up here, with you under these stars, knowing that I had loved and been loved in return, that would be worth every drop of blood, every city destroyed, every sacrifice." And Altan understood then that love was not about changing the world. Love was about changing the person you were. It was about allowing yourself to be transformed by the presence of another soul. It was about choosing every single day to build instead of destroy. And that, in its own way, was revolutionary. But the story of Subutai and Altan was never truly about just the two of them. Their son Batu would become one of the most powerful Khans in Mongol history. He would lead the invasion of Eastern Europe, establishing the Golden Horde, a Mongol Khanate that would rule for over 200 years. And the influence of his mother Altan would flow through him, a subtle but profound insistence on respecting the traditions of conquered peoples, on building infrastructure instead of simply destroying, on seeing the empire not as a tool of domination but as a vehicle for creating something lasting. Some historians would later argue that without the influence of Subutai's love for Altan, without his philosophical shift toward seeing conquered peoples as potential allies rather than simply subjects, the Mongol Empire might have collapsed far more quickly than it did. But that is a story for another time. For now, know this, that in a world that seemed determined to destroy everything beautiful, two people found each other. A general and a healer. A warrior and a shaman. A Mongol and a Tatar. And in finding each other, they discovered that love was not a weakness or a distraction. Love was the most powerful force on earth. Love was what allowed empires to last. Love was what transformed conquerors into builders. Love was what made it possible for even the most ruthless warrior to wake up one day and choose peace over war, connection over conquest. To find out what happens next in the story of the Mongol Empire, how the children of Subutai and Altan shaped the future of nations, subscribe now and join us for the next chapter of this epic historical saga.